In the fertile plains of Western Europe, a power emerged that would define the height of global prestige and culture, from the messy ruins of the Dark Ages to the gold-covered halls of Versailles and the massive battlefields of Napoleon. France transformed from a few scattered tribes into a giant of human history. This is the story of an empire built on the divine right of kings, the fire of revolution, and a language that still spans the globe today. Here are 1,000 years of French ambition, glory, and transformation, from the birth of the Franks to the modern Francophonie in 20 minutes. The story of the French Empire doesn't start in a fancy palace. Instead, it begins in the messy ruins left behind after the Roman Empire fell apart. By the year 400, the region we now call France was a chaotic mix of different tribes, Visigoths, Burgundians, and Romans, all fighting for control. Into this mess stepped the Franks, a Germanic group that wasn't very refined, but had a brilliant leader named Clovis I. In 508, Clovis made a decision that changed French history forever. He converted to Catholicism. This wasn't just about his personal faith, it was a smart political move. By joining the church, Clovis got the support of the most powerful organization in Europe. It gave the French kings a divine right to rule, meaning people believed they were chosen by God. This special relationship earned France the nickname the eldest daughter of the church, giving it a sense of importance that its neighbors didn't have. About 300 years later, this Frankish power reached its first big peak under Charlemagne. He was a massive figure who spent his whole life at war, pushing his borders from Spain all the way into Germany. But Charlemagne did more than just fight. He brought back art, law, and education, starting a mini rebirth of culture in Europe. On Christmas Day, in the year 800, the alliance between the Franks and the Church reached its highest point. The Pope crowned Charlemagne Emperor of the Romans. This was a huge deal because it meant the glory of ancient Rome had been brought back to life in the West. Charlemagne wasn't just a king anymore. He was the leader of a new Christian empire. After Charlemagne died, his huge empire was eventually split up among his grandsons. The western part was called Francia Occidentalis, and this area became the heart of modern France. Even though the empire was divided, the idea of being an empire stayed stuck in the French DNA. They didn't see themselves as just another small country. They saw themselves as the true heirs to the Roman Empire. This early period set the stage for everything that came later. It created the grand story of France, a nation that felt destined to lead others through power, religion, and ideas. Whether it was the Knights of the Middle Ages, the famous Sun King Louis XIV, or the conquests of Napoleon, every French dream of building a global empire can be traced back to these first Frankish leaders. They took the broken pieces of the Roman world and used their new religion to build a foundation that would last for 1,000 years. The medieval grinds, feudalism, and the English rivalry. For a long time after Charlemagne, the title King of France didn't mean much. The early kings, known as the Capetians, only really controlled a small patch of land around Paris called the Île-de-France. Outside that tiny circle, powerful dukes and counts ruled their own territories like mini-empires. They often had more money and bigger armies than the king himself. During this part of the Middle Ages, the goal wasn't to conquer the world. It was simply for the King of France to finally conquer France. This struggle got much more complicated because of the Normans. In 1066, a man named William the Conqueror invaded England and became its king. This created a very strange political mess. William was a vassal of the French king, which meant he was technically supposed to obey him for his lands in France. However, as the King of England, he was a powerful independent ruler across the sea. This awkward relationship sparked a family feud that lasted for hundreds of years. Eventually, this rivalry exploded into the Hundred Years' War, which went on from 1337 to 1453. For a long time, it looked like France would lose everything. The English won massive battles and took over huge chunks of French territory. The French monarchy was on the verge of collapse until an unlikely hero appeared, a teenage peasant girl named Joan of Arc. Joan claimed she heard divine voices telling her to drive the English out of France. Her bravery and leadership gave the French army a new sense of purpose. Even though she was eventually captured and executed, her death turned the war into a national crusade. The French people began to fight not just for a king, but for their country. By the time the fighting finally stopped in 1453, the English had been kicked out of almost all of France. The war changed everything for the French monarchy. To win, the king had to create a permanent, standing army and a system to collect taxes from everyone. For the first time, the king had the money and the military power to be the true boss of his own land. With the internal rivals finally defeated and the English gone, the French kings were ready to stop looking at their own borders and start looking at the rest of the world. This victory set the stage for France to become the global superpower of the coming centuries. The Sun King's gilded reach. By the 17th century, France decided that if it was going to be an empire, it had to be the most dazzling one on earth. The leader behind this grand vision was Louis XIV, famously known as the Sun King. Louis was a master of control. He realized that if he kept the powerful nobles busy with fancy parties and gossip, they wouldn't have the time or energy to plot rebellions against him. To make this happen, he built Versailles, a palace so massive and gold-covered that it basically became a weapon of psychological warfare. By forcing the nobles to live there under his watchful eye, he turned them from dangerous rivals into humble servants. While the aristocrats were distracted by their expensive wigs and court manners, Louis XIV was turning France into the center of European culture, art, and power. However, the French Empire wasn't just staying in Europe. While the nobles were dancing at Versailles, French explorers were reaching across the Atlantic Ocean. This era is known as the First French Colonial Empire. Unlike the Spanish, who were obsessed with finding gold and silver, the French focused on what they called soft gold, animal furs. Famous explorers like Jacques Cartier and Samuel de Champlain traveled deep into North America. They claimed a giant T-shaped territory that stretched from the icy forests of Quebec all the way down the Mississippi River to the warm swamps of Louisiana. At the same time, France took control of islands in the Caribbean, such as Saint-Domingue, which we now know as Haiti. These islands became sugar engines, producing massive amounts of wealth that flowed back to Paris. But this incredible wealth had a dark and brutal side. It was built entirely on the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of enslaved people were forced to work in terrible conditions, a shadow that would eventually lead to the most successful slave revolt in human history. By the mid-1700s, France had become a global superpower, but it had a big problem. It was spread too thin. France got dragged into the 7 Years' War, which many historians call the real First World War, because it was fought all over the globe. The results were a disaster for the French. They lost almost all of their land in North America and India to their great rival, Great Britain. The French Empire was badly bruised and broke, but the story was far from over. Just as the old system was starting to fall apart, the French Revolution would soon shake the world. Out of that chaos, a short and incredibly ambitious officer named Napoleon Bonaparte would emerge. He was ready to take the shattered pieces of the French dream and set the entire world on fire once again. The Napoleonic Hurricane, the French Revolution of 1789, changed everything. It did the unthinkable by executing the king and ending the divine right, the old belief that monarchs were chosen by God. However, the French people soon realized they didn't actually want less power. They wanted to wield that power themselves. Into this chaos stepped Napoleon Bonaparte. He didn't just take over a throne, he captured the imagination of the entire world. Napoleon's empire was a radical new experiment. He wasn't just a conqueror who wanted more land. He was a reformer who wanted to reorganize how society worked. Wherever his famous Grande Armée marched, they brought the Napoleonic Code. This was a single, logical legal system that replaced a confusing mess of old feudal laws. He abolished the ancient Holy Roman Empire, redrew the map of Italy, and forced the traditional kings of Europe to treat him, a commoner born on the island of Corsica, as their equal. By 1812, the French Empire reached its absolute peak. Napoleon was the undisputed master of the European continent. But then, he made the classic mistake that has ruined many empires. He tried to invade Russia. He marched in with a massive force of 600,000 men, but the brutal Russian winter and a lack of supplies crushed his army. Fewer than 100,000 men made it back out alive. This disaster weakened him enough for his enemies to unite against him. After his final defeat at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, Napoleon was sent into exile, and his First Empire was broken apart. At first glance, it seemed like France was back to where it started. But you can't just erase a man like Napoleon from history. The seeds he planted across Europe, ideas like nationalism, pride in one's own country, meritocracy, the idea that people should get jobs based on talent rather than who their parents are, and modern government administration stayed alive. These ideas didn't disappear with Napoleon's army. Instead, they grew into the foundation of the modern European states we see today. Napoleon showed that a single, organized government could run an entire continent, and even though his empire fell, the way he managed power changed the world forever. The First Empire was over, but France had proven that it could reshape the globe through both the strength of its cannons and the power of its laws. The stage was now set for France to reinvent itself once more in the centuries to come. The Second Empire, the civilizing facade. After Napoleon's fall, France took a moment to recover, but soon, the hunger for power returned, and France launched a second colonial empire in the 1800s. This time, the goal wasn't just about trading furs or sugar. It was about prestige, the desire to be a top-tier world power again. France created a new excuse for taking over other lands called the Mission Civilisatrice, or the Civilizing Mission. Even though France was now a republic that believed in freedom, its leaders argued that it was their duty to spread French culture, the Catholic religion, and the French language to the rest of the world. They claimed they were helping people in Africa and Asia by bringing them modern values. The expansion started in 1830 when France invaded Algiers in North Africa. From there, they didn't stop. They moved south and west, carving out a massive empire that covered nearly all of West and Central Africa. On the other side of the world, in Southeast Asia, they took control of Indochina, which today is Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. By the early 1900s, the French flag flew over a territory that was roughly 20 times larger than France itself. Back in Paris, this was a time of great pride. The government held colonial exhibitions, which were like giant world fairs. Millions of French citizens visited these parks to marvel at exotic animals, strange products, and even people brought from the colonies to be put on display. To many people in Paris, the empire looked like a glorious success. But beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. The people living in these colonies were beginning to notice a huge hypocrisy. They looked at the famous French motto, liberty, equality, fraternity, and asked a very dangerous question. If these are truly French values, why are we being treated like subjects instead of equals? This question planted the seeds of rebellion. The people of Africa and Asia began to realize that while France talked about freedom, it was only practicing it at home. This tension would eventually lead to a series of violent struggles that would tear the empire apart in the next century. France had built a giant global house, but the foundation was starting to crack. The traumatic twilight, 1945 to 1962. World War II was the beginning of the end. When Nazi Germany conquered France in 6 weeks in 1940, the myth of the unbeatable master died. In the jungles of Vietnam and the mountains of Algeria, local leaders like Ho Chi Minh realized that the French Empire was an illusion held together by bluff and bayonets. The exit was not graceful. France fought 2 incredibly bloody wars of decolonization. The first ended in 1954 at Dien Bien Phu, where a peasant army defeated a modern European force. The second, in Algeria, was even worse. Algeria was legally a part of France, not just a colony, and the war to keep it nearly collapsed the French Republic itself. It took the return of Charles de Gaulle to realize that to save France, he had to let the empire go. The empire of the mind. Francophonie, and beyond. So, is the French Empire dead? Physically, yes, but look at a map of the world's oceans. Because of scattered islands like Réunion, Martinique, and French Polynesia, France controls the largest exclusive economic zone, EEZ, on the planet. surpassing even the US and Russia. These are not colonies. They are départements, where citizens vote in French elections and use the euro. Then there is the Francophonie. There are over 320 million French speakers today, and that number is skyrocketing because of population booms in Africa. By 2050, French could be the most spoken language in the world after English and Mandarin. The French Empire transitioned from a political entity into a cultural one. It is a soft power empire built on cinema, philosophy, fashion, and a specific way of looking at the world. From the legal codes of South America to the cafes of Dakar and the high-end boutiques of Tokyo, the thousand-year project of France didn't end. It just evolved into something that doesn't require an army to maintain. The story of the French Empire is a reminder that land can be lost and armies can be defeated, but an idea, if it's loud enough, proud enough, and of course, spoken in French, is very hard to kill.